At 78 years old, Sally Field has earned the right to say anything she wants. 2 Oscars, a legacy of unforgettable roles, and the warm affection of audiences around the world. But behind the beloved characters and standing ovations lies a woman who remembers the insults, remembers the betrayals, remembers every co-star who crossed the line. 4 decades, she kept it quiet, choosing grace over scandal, silence over spectacle. But now, with nothing left to prove and everything left to say, Sally Field is finally naming the 7 actors she hated the most. These weren't tabloid tiffs. They were deep, bruising clashes on set and off that left scars no audience could see. And once you hear these names, you'll never look at some Hollywood legends the same way again. Let's begin. Number 1, Burt Reynolds. In the golden haze of late 1970s Hollywood, Sally Field and Burt Reynolds were the industry's favorite love story. A-list glamour, on-screen electricity, tabloid gold. Together, they starred in Smokey and the Bandit, The End, Hooper, and Smokey and the Bandit 2, dazzling audiences with charm and chemistry that felt too real to be just acting. But behind the smiles, the red carpets, and the box office records, the reality was far darker. In 2018, Sally Field broke decades of silence with her brutally honest memoir, In Pieces. And with that, the myth of her fairy tale romance with Burt Reynolds shattered. He was not someone I could be around. He was just not good for me in any way, she wrote. Their relationship began in 1977 on the set of Smokey and the Bandit. He was already a box office king. She was trying to break free from the girl next door image and prove herself as a serious actress. Reynolds pursued her relentlessly, charming, funny, magnetic, and for a while she believed in the fantasy. But according to Field, what seemed like romance quickly twisted into control. He wanted me next to him, smiling, silent. She said he didn't want me to speak freely. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence, override my decisions, question my intelligence. Reynolds, in Sally's eyes, needed to be the brightest star in the room. And if that meant dimming her light, so be it. When Sally was nominated and ultimately won the Oscar for Norma Rae in 1980, the world saw a triumphant moment for an extraordinary actress. But behind closed doors, her boyfriend was anything but supportive. When the Oscars came around, he really was not a nice guy around me then and was not going to go with me, Field recalled in 50 Oscar Nights. He said, "You don't think you're going to win anything, do you?" Humiliated and alone on the biggest night of her career, Field ended up attending with friends, not the man she loved. To the world, Reynolds was rugged, witty, masculine perfection. But to Field, the man behind the Bandit, was emotionally manipulative and deeply insecure. He belittled me. He mocked my looks. He diminished my acting ability with subtle cutting comments. She told Variety, one minute he'd be affectionate, the next he'd punish me with silence. It eroded my sense of self. Still, she tried. I wanted to love him. I did love him, but he hurt me. Burt Reynolds spent his final years rewriting the narrative. In interviews promoting his own 2015 memoir, But Enough About Me, he called Sally the love of my life. I miss her terribly, he told Vanity Fair. I don't know why I was so stupid. Men are like that, you know. You find the perfect person and then you do everything you can to screw it up. But Field didn't buy the posthumous praise. He somehow invented in his rethinking of everything that I was more important to him than he had thought, she said. But I wasn't. He just wanted to have the thing he didn't have. She was clear. Burt may have loved the idea of her, but not the real woman she was. Sally Field didn't speak to Burt Reynolds for the last 30 years of his life. He was a hugely important part of my life. But for a very short period, she said on The View, I would feel him kind of reach out to me via the press. But I really didn't speak to him after the relationship ended. And perhaps the most telling moment came in 2022 when Field appeared on Watch What Happens Live and was asked who gave her the worst on-screen kiss. Without hesitation, Burt Reynolds, she said, laughing. It was not something he did very well. A lot of drooling was involved. When Burt Reynolds died in 2018, Field issued no angry statements, but also no warm eulogies. Her reaction was measured, reflective, and above all honest. He will always be in my heart and in my history, she said. I think at least he's not hurting right now. In the end, Sally Field didn't need revenge. She had something more powerful, perspective. Number 2, Tommy Lee Jones. In 1981, Sally Field signed on to Backroads with genuine excitement. The script was raw and full of promise. A drifter and a sex worker, both broken in their own way, finding something like love on the margins of America. But from day one, Tommy Lee Jones made it clear he wasn't there to connect. Not on screen, not off, not ever. He barely acknowledged me. Field later said, no warmth, no small talk, nothing. It was like acting opposite a wall. Jones, known for his gruff persona, didn't just ignore the usual camaraderie between leads. He froze it out. He hit his marks, said his lines, and left. There was no collaboration, no shared rhythm, just a chill that seeped into every scene. We were supposed to play two broken people learning to love, Sally once said. But I was playing alone. She tried to bridge the gap, asking questions between takes, making light jokes, even trying to bond over the characters. Jones didn't bite. Sometimes he didn't even look at her. He treated me like I didn't belong on that set, she said bluntly, like I was beneath him. When the chemistry failed, so did the film. Critics tore Backroads apart. The main complaint, a total lack of chemistry between its two stars. But what audiences didn't see, what no review could reveal, was the emotional standoff that shaped every frame. The tension wasn't acting. It was real. The set wasn't just cold, Field admitted. It was isolating. It drained me. She never worked with Tommy Lee Jones again, at least not for decades. And when asked about it in interviews, Field never exploded or got petty. But the frost in her words said enough. Fast forward to 2016. Sally Field appears on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen. The question is playful. Who was your worst on-screen kiss? She doesn't hesitate. Probably the worst would have to be, and has probably improved, I don't know. But it was Tommy Lee Jones, she confessed, laughing awkwardly. It was a bad phase of his life. The audience gasped. But Sally wasn't out for revenge. In fact, she followed it with a kind of backhanded compassion. Bless his heart, I adore him, she said. Years later, when we saw each other, he came up to me and said, I apologize. A rare, unexpected moment of contrition from Jones, a man not exactly known for warm reconciliations. That apology marked the beginning of something neither of them probably expected, closure. Years after their clash, Field and Jones reunited on screen in Lincoln 2012. Both delivered award-nominated performances. Both seemed to coexist professionally. They weren't friends, but they weren't feuding anymore. His probably improved, Field joked again. And maybe he had. Jones has never spoken publicly about the Backroads tension, but insiders say his off-screen behavior mellowed over the years. Whether that's due to age, reflection, or regret is anyone's guess, but Sally's grace in speaking about the past shows a woman who made peace with it, not by forgetting, but by surviving it. Number 3, Robert Blake. Known for his searing intensity and unpredictable behavior, Robert Blake had a reputation even before Say Goodbye Maggie Cole. He was a method actor in the most extreme sense. Fully immersed, emotionally volatile, and utterly unconcerned with collaboration. He didn't just act unpredictable. He lived it. One crew member later recalled, every day was a different mood, a different storm. From the first day of shooting, Field knew something was off. Blake constantly rewrote lines on the fly, refused to stick to blocking, and derailed rehearsals with off-script rants. What he called improvisation Sally experienced as sabotage. He would go off-script mid-scene, she said, throw in things that didn't belong, change the tone completely. It wasn't about the story. It was about him. And it didn't stop when the cameras cut. Crew members whispered about Blake's tirades, yelling at lighting techs, storming off set over trivial disagreements, and refusing to take direction. His mood could flip in an instant. Field, the consummate professional, tried to hold the production together. She tried diplomacy, humor, patience, but the weight became unbearable. I was balancing a demanding role and playing peacekeeper on set, she later said, but it was a losing battle. Every scene became a psychological standoff. Every take was another landmine. And eventually, the damage couldn't be ignored. The project, once full of promise, collapsed. Say Goodbye Maggie Cole was shelved before it ever aired. Just buried. For most actors, that might have just been a frustrating career footnote. For Sally, it was something deeper, something personal. There are actors who act, she said. And there are actors who try to make everyone else small so they feel big. Blake was the second kind. Unlike other feuds that unfold in interviews or red carpet jabs, Blake never responded publicly. No denial, no apology, no attempt to explain. Whether it was pride, guilt, or indifference, he said nothing. But the absence of response didn't lessen the weight of the experience for Sally. It wasn't just disappointing. She said it was traumatic. The psychological bruises stayed long after the production shut down. In interviews years later, Field rarely mentioned Blake by name, but when she did, her tone carried no rage, just clarity. "That kind of chaos," she said, "masquerades as genius far too often, but all it does is damage people." There was no formal reconciliation, no reunion, not even a phone call. Robert Blake passed away in 2023, decades after Say Goodbye Maggie Cole imploded. Sally never spoke to him again. In interviews, she referred to him as someone she endured, not someone she ever truly worked with. There were no public tributes from Field after his death, no gentle rewriting of history. And maybe that's the point. For Sally Field, that chapter wasn't about rivalry. It was about survival, about recognizing toxic behavior, standing firm, and walking away. Not with anger, but with resolve. She left Say Goodbye Maggie Cole with one vow. Never again would I tolerate chaos disguised as genius. And she never did. Number 4, Shirley MacLaine. Steel Magnolias was seen by many as a powerful tribute to womanhood. This Southern classic with Sally Field and Shirley MacLaine at its heart beautifully blended heartache, laughter, and strength, making their on-screen performances truly unforgettable. But off-camera, they were locked in a silent war that never truly ended. Sally Field came to Steel Magnolias carrying the emotional gravity of her role. Emlyn, the mother who loses her daughter. She came prepared, raw, ready to bleed on camera. She wanted to serve the story with vulnerability and truth. But Shirley MacLaine, she treated every scene like a battleground. One crew member said, "It wasn't about connection. It was about control." From the very first rehearsal, whispers started. Shirley wasn't just confident. She was commanding, walking onto set with the air of someone who'd already decided the spotlight belonged to her. Shirley brought a cloud of chaos wherever she went, Sally said years later, her voice measured but unmistakably firm. MacLaine, a seasoned Oscar winner with decades in the business, reportedly dismissed direction, rolled her eyes at emotional beats, and interrupted scenes to insert herself into moments that had nothing to do with her character. It wasn't collaborative, it was disruptive. The turning point came during one of Steel Magnolia's most gut-wrenching scenes, Emlyn's grief-stricken monologue after her daughter's death. It was a moment written for Sally to shine, but Shirley wouldn't let it happen easily. "It took 17 takes," Field later recalled. "Not because I couldn't get there. I was there, but Shirley kept breaking the tone. She'd throw in sarcastic quips, undercutting the moment, as if grief needed punchlines. What the audience ultimately saw was magic. But what Sally remembered was sabotage. To her, it was never about competing. It was about authenticity. And in her view, Shirley couldn't or wouldn't respect that. "There are actors who serve the story," Sally once said, "and actors who serve themselves." Shirley sighed. Mostly silence. MacLaine has never directly responded to Field's remarks. No formal denials, no thoughtful reflections, just silence. And perhaps that's telling in itself. In interviews over the years, Shirley has alluded to her approach to acting as cosmic and instinctual, often implying that others simply don't understand her process. When asked about Steel Magnolias, she's focused more on the film's legacy than any personal frictions. But for those who were there, the atmosphere was unmistakable. The tension was always just beneath the surface. One production assistant told a documentary crew they were too professional to scream, but every scene felt like a silent struggle for control. Did the feud ever end? Not exactly. There was no dramatic falling out, no screaming match, just a cool, quiet divide that neither woman felt compelled to cross. In public, they've kept things civil. But when Sally Field was asked to reflect on her experience years later, her tone was unmistakably honest. "I don't hate Shirley," she told Variety. "But I don't forget either. Their paths haven't crossed on screen since Steel Magnolias. There have been no glowing tributes, no warm reunions, just a mutual respectful distance." MacLaine, now well into her 90s, continues to work enigmatic and unapologetically herself. Field, now 78, has nothing left to prove. She's long past the stage where she sugarcoats the past. Number 5, James Woods. In the world of acting, trust is currency. The unspoken agreement between scene partners, "I've got you," is sacred. Sally Field built her career on that bond, honesty, vulnerability, and emotional precision. But when she walked onto the set of Kiss Me Goodbye alongside James Woods, she didn't find a partner. She found an opponent. From the moment rehearsals began, Woods brought an energy that felt less collaborative and more combative. Where Sally favored intuition, he wielded intellect like a weapon. Razor-sharp, relentless, and unapologetic. He didn't just read the script, he rewrote it, often literally. Lines changed, blocking shifted, beats restructured, all without warning. Directors were left scrambling. Co-stars bewildered. But Woods thrived in the chaos. For him, unpredictability was power. Sally, however, saw something darker. He was always the smartest guy in the room and he needed you to know it. She would later say, but intellect without empathy, that's not genius. That's bullying. The tension wasn't always loud, but it was constant. Woods questioned everything. The script, the director's choices, even Sally's performance. Sometimes during a take, he once stopped mid-scene, turned to the director, and said, "She's flat. We need to find something real here." Sally didn't respond. She simply walked off set and didn't return until the cameras were ready to roll again. But the wound lingered. What hurt more than the interruption was what came after. Woods, she recalled, approached her privately and said, "You're better than this, but you're not trying hard enough." To him, maybe it was motivation. To Sally, it was erasure. "I wasn't failing," she later told a close friend. "I was feeling," but to him, that didn't count unless it came in his language. The emotional toll crept into her performance, not as inspiration, but as resistance. Every scene became an act of self-defense. Behind the scenes, she began skipping rehearsal just to avoid confrontation. Cast and crew noted the change. One assistant director later recalled, "You could feel her pull away. She wasn't herself. Not because she couldn't be, but because he wouldn't let her." For Sally, Kiss Me Goodbye became a turning point. Not professionally, the film came and went, but personally, it was the moment she recognized that intellectual bravado and artistic sabotage often wear the same face. "It wasn't the hardest role I ever played," she reflected in a 2016 interview. "But it was the most demoralizing experience I'd ever had on a set." And what did James Woods say in return? Very little, at least publicly. When asked years later about his time on Kiss Me Goodbye, he dismissed the tension with a shrug. "I push people. That's what good actors do. If someone can't handle that, maybe they're in the wrong profession." The words didn't surprise Sally. They confirmed everything she'd felt on set. Today, there's no friendship, no reconciliation, no attempt at closure, just silence. And for Sally, that's enough. She doesn't speak his name often, but when she does, it's with the clarity of someone who's been burned and learned. "It wasn't a feud," she said once. "It was a lesson." Number 6, Dustin Hoffman. In the early 1980s, Sally Field walked into a chemistry read for a film that, despite high expectations, never saw the light of day. She was already riding high on acclaim, a proven force with 2 Emmys and an Oscar in her grasp. But that day, none of it mattered because in the room waiting for her was Dustin Hoffman. To the public, Hoffman was a titan. The Graduate, Kramer vs. Kramer, Tootsie. But to Sally Field, what happened in that room stripped away the myth. It wasn't a collaboration. It wasn't even a fair shot. It was sabotage disguised as intellect. From the moment she stepped in, the balance was broken. Hoffman cracked jokes with the producers, made loud asides about the script's flaws, and set the tone as if the scene was already his. When Sally began reading, he interrupted casually, repeatedly. "Try it slower," he said at one point. "No, she wouldn't say it that way," he added moments later. It wasn't guidance, it was dismissal. "It felt like I was being corrected by a high school drama teacher, not a peer," Sally later recalled. "Except this teacher didn't want me to succeed. He wanted to make sure I failed." What stung more than the corrections was the smirk, the sense of performance, not on the page, but in the room. Hoffman performing for the producers, making his superiority clear, using her as a prop to elevate his own authority. After the reading, Sally left deflated but determined to shake it off until days later word reached her through a mutual friend. Hoffman had boasted about the audition. He told them the chemistry wasn't there and I made sure of it. The source said it hit like a punch. Not just the cruelty of the comment, but the calculated nature of it. He hadn't merely outshined her. He'd undermined her deliberately. For Sally, that moment changed everything. She was used to rejection. Every actor is. But this wasn't rejection. It was humiliation. And it left a scar deeper than any bad review. Men like that, she later confided in a private interview. They don't build stories, they build empires, one ego at a time. She never worked with Dustin Hoffman again, never spoke of the moment in public, but friends close to her say it shaped her private list of never again. Men who confuse dominance for genius and control for collaboration. As for Hoffman, he's never publicly addressed the incident, but his name has surfaced in other stories, tales of intensity bleeding into aggression, of lines crossed in the name of process. For Sally, that wasn't process, it was bullying. The two have since attended the same award ceremonies, the same charity functions, but they've never shared a stage, never appeared side by side. And perhaps that's for the best. Number 7, Jeff Bridges. When she stepped onto a set with Jeff Bridges in the late 1970s, back when both were on their way to becoming icons, she expected collaboration. What she got instead was chaos. It was a quiet feud. No screaming matches, no public breakdowns, just a slow, simmering disillusionment that would follow Sally for decades. They were paired together in a screen test for a romantic drama that never made it to production. The idea was to capture two raw, honest performers in a whirlwind love story. But what unfolded was less chemistry and more contradiction. Jeff Bridges, by then already known for his loose, improvisational style, came into the room like it was a beach house party rather than a professional set. He was barefoot, Sally later recalled in a private interview. Literally barefoot, like it was a barbecue, not a screen test. And it wasn't just the appearance, it was the attitude. As Sally tried to ground herself in the emotional truth of the scene, Bridges played it like jazz. Offbeat, unserious, interrupting lines with chuckles, rewrites, and improvised gestures that pulled focus and broke tension. I remember looking at him and thinking, are you trying to get through this or get out of it? She later said it felt like I was acting with someone who was bored of the story before it even started. To Sally, it wasn't just unprofessional, it was disrespectful. What Bridges saw as spontaneity, Field saw as sabotage. What he called keeping it loose, she called refusing to listen. When the test ended, the director praised Jeff's natural charisma, and Field felt the sting of invisibility. I left that room feeling erased, she admitted years later, like I just played my heart out for someone who never even looked up to see it. The bitterness only grew when during a press junket years later, Bridges was asked about his most difficult screen tests. With a smirk, he reportedly said, "There was one where the actress was so stiff, I thought she might shatter if I touched her." He never named her. But those close to Sally say she knew exactly who he meant. He thought he was being playful, one friend confided. But to Sally, that was the final confirmation. He hadn't just missed the moment, he mocked it. Sally never worked with Bridges again, never commented publicly. But when asked years later in an interview which actor left her disappointed, she paused, then said, "Some people treat acting like a sandbox. I prefer a stage." Jeff, for his part, never issued a formal apology, but his views softened with age. In a 2009 interview, he was asked about regrets. "I think I misunderstood a lot of people when I was younger." He said, "Some actors want play, some want precision. I wish I'd learned sooner how to meet them halfway." He didn't mention Sally Field, but maybe he didn't need to. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video drops. See you next time.